Hello and welcome to Rebound Athletics video on rehabilitation of the upper extremity. We're going to give you a systematic program on rehabilitating the upper extremity based on the principles of rebound athletics. In the upper extremity, just like in the lower extremity, the upper extremity kinetic chain has to absorb and transfer kinetic energy up and down, hand, shoulder, shoulder to hand. Roll the video, please. So in this example, she's going to stand on the BOSU, and the kinetic energy of the weighted ball, as she catches it, she has to use her upper extremity to diminish the energy forces and remain stable on the BOSU. So that is from the hand up to the shoulder, she's absorbing the energy. Next slide, please. Roll the video. In this example, it's the opposite. The body's kinetic energy and momentum is taken by the upper extremity and transferred from the shoulder all the way down to the hand, which is holding a racket. And then it directs the ball. This is the same motion as in throwing. And in racket sports or throwing, the muscles of the upper extremity have to control that motion in order to get the desired effect, an ace serve or a great pitch. A mobile, stable, mobile pattern in the upper extremity, just like we have in the lower extremity. You can see some of our other videos when we talked about the hip being mobile, the lumbar spine or core being stable, the thoracic spine being mobile. If we look at the upper extremity, the first thing we see is the scapulothoracic joint has to be stable. It needs relative stability in sports or even everyday activities. And this is the articulation between the scapula and the chest wall. That needs to remain stable. It's not that the scapula doesn't move along the chest wall, but it needs to be a stable fulcrum for the glenohumeral joint to move around it. Actually, if you look at the scapula straight on, the scapula forms half of the glenohumeral joint. This is the glenoid or the socket. It's all part of the scapula. And here you see it's surrounded by the ligaments and the rotator cuff. But it's part of the scapula. So if the scapula is stable, it gives a stable foundation for the humerus and the glenohumeral joint to move in all directions around that stable fulcrum. So if we know that in orthopedics, if your scapula is winging, we call this winging where one sticks out, or certainly there's asymmetry between one side and the other side, that can lead to pathology, and it has effects all the way down the kinetic chain to other joints of the body. So we're going to show you a lot of exercises on how to stabilize that scapula, and we're going to concentrate on the musculature that attaches to the scapula, like the rhomboids and the lats here, trapezius, and the serratus. All those muscles stabilize the scapula. Again, going back to the mobile, stable, mobile concept, if the scapula is stable, the glenohumeral joint needs to be mobile. And indeed, the glenohumeral joint has the largest range of motion of any joint in the body. Here, the glenohumeral joint's in here, surrounded by musculature, and yet the total range of motion of the shoulder is the largest of any joint in the body. If we move down to the elbow, what happens is the elbow needs to be stable, right? Glenohumeral joint is mobile, elbow needs to be stable, and indeed the elbow is surrounded or encapsulated with very thick ligaments to try to keep it stable. Most famous of which is the medial collateral ligament here, or what's called the ulnar collateral ligament, which sometimes is injured in pitchers. If there's instability at the elbow from ligament injury or other problems around the elbow area, that will cause problems up and down the kinetic chain. Going back to the mobile, stable, mobile concept, stable at the elbow, mobile at the wrist. The wrist needs to be mobile, and actually the motors that move the wrist, the muscles that move the wrist, originate in the elbow area. So if the wrist is going to be mobile, a lot of times it's the muscles that have shortened that create limitations in the motion of the wrist. So this can be seen in the epicondylar muscles. Lateral side would be tennis elbow. Medial side would be pitcher's elbow. And it's actually motion of the wrist and flexibility of the wrist is always part of any rehabilitation program for those kinds of problems. And going back to mobile, stable, mobile, if the wrist is mobile, the hand has to be stable. Why is the hand stable? Because it's gripping a ball or a racket. So that gives us our mobile, stable, mobile pattern in the upper extremity, just as we have in the lower extremity. Now Greg is going to show us a detailed rehabilitation program for the upper extremity. We're going to emphasize first mobility before strength, which is one of our principles. We're going to work on mobilizing the upper extremity, then we'll move to strengthening exercises of the upper extremity, and finally we'll do some functional exercises that incorporate more of the entire body. So at this point, I'm going to take it to Greg Kadishon, who will explain the program.